Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this PCB Nordic region webinar. My name is Morten Nielsen. I'm from Denmark, where I work as a security consultant, and I work quite a lot with NIS2. So PCB asked me to talk about NIS2 and go a bit beyond that, especially with regards to the Nordic region. Quite logically, where I'm from, where most of us, I assume, are from. So I thought that I would start out with NIS2. Where are we now? Talk a bit about that. Then talk about the challenges that we see from my side with the clients we have and the networks that I talk to and and join. And then about the next big thing that's on the horizon or already cresting the horizon. So that's the agenda for today. Not much, but doesn't seem like much, but there's lots to talk about. The first thing is, where are we now here in the Nordics? And I know I don't have every Nordic country here. Given that I'm from Denmark, I can give you more in-depth knowledge about the status on NIS2 in Denmark. But let's start with the three of the other Nordic countries. The first is Sweden, and from what I hear, the directive has not been transposed or is in hearing at all. There is a draft that the Swedish government is working on, and they expect this draft of the NIS2 implementation into Swedish law to be sent into general hearing later this year, maybe not until the end of the year. And depending on how that hearing goes, it will have to go through the usual parliamentary steps in order to be transposed and enter into force. So Sweden is not quite there yet with NIS2. Finland, well, it missed my notice, probably because my Swedish language skills are reduced to 1, 2, and 3 and so on. But I do, on a GDPR aspect, work closely together with a few Finns. But apparently, the NIS2 has been entered into force as the Cybersecurity Act more than 2 months ago in Finland. But when I read up on how much of this has been implemented, at least according to the sources I found online and the Finnish Center for Cybersecurity, there's still work to do. So I'm assuming that you will see guidelines and lesser acts and laws that might help to operationalize and specify what NIS2 means in Finland. For Norway, well, Norway isn't exactly part of the Union, EU, but it's part of the economic area. So they also have to implement NIS2, and there is no set date for that at the moment. The National Security Authority say that it's going to happen sometime next year in 2026, but there's no more specifics than that. I actually do have a few clients in Norway, and they often talk about NIS2, and they keep asking me what to do, given that in Denmark we now have the law. We weren't as fast as Finland, but we do have a law, and we have some guidelines. As I'm from Denmark, I can go a bit more into detail on what the status is in Denmark. As we probably all know, it was supposed to be transposed into national law sometimes last year, actually on October 17th, and then we all had to live by the rules by October 18th, 2024. But I think EU sent out a notice that only 7 countries actually managed to implement the law into national law. So Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, we're not alone. We're just a bit behind schedule like most other countries. But as you all know, the directive was passed through the EU Parliament in October 2022. I'm sure you all live streamed it just as I did, and were quite surprised by how little notice it actually got. 2023, well, the directive entered into force and we all had to implement it. In Denmark, we got the first draft for a NIS2 main law sent out for consultation or hearing in June 2024. In Denmark, we've split the law into a main law that encompasses almost all sectors, but the finance part of NIS2, not the DORA, the finance part, the energy part, and the telco parts have their own laws. But in June last year, we had the first draft for the main law, and then everything changed in August, because in Denmark, we decided to reorganize the departments within the ministries, and suddenly NIS2 was no longer under the Ministry of Defense, but under an entirely new ministry that had to spend the next 6 months just trying to figure out what their purpose in life was. So everything got delayed, except for the non-main laws. So the energy sector law was sent out in late 2024, and in October 2024, the agency for the finance sector sent out and said, NIS2 is easy. Everybody who's a supplier to those within DORA have to comply with NIS2. So from 18th of October 2024, every supplier was now had to live by NIS2 without the law having entered into force. Then we got sectorial acts. The energy sector got sent out for consultations in December. The main law, the new main law, then got sent out in February of this year. Well, they skipped the hearing and just sent it into Parliament, and they started working on it. So all the changes from when it was sent into consultation until February were not sent out for people to comment on. They just started the parliamentary process, which caught quite a few companies by surprise. In March, we now have the energy sector law, which comes into force and must be complied with. So we have October, the NIS2 covers financial vendors. In March 2025, we now have energy sector compliance. And then in not last month, now 1.5 months ago in April, we finally got the NIS2 law adopted here in Denmark, and we can now comply with the requirement of having transposed the directive international law. So for Danish companies, this has been quite a roller coaster, given that some had to comply with it from October last year, some had to comply with it from March this year. Everybody else now knows that they have to comply with it from July of this year. But luckily, for those entities within NIS2, not so much for the people working with NIS2, the new ministry, I don't even recall their English name, has the minister for that has gone out and said that NIS2 compliance, the first year, we won't go hard on you, no fines, less sanctions, take it easy, which from my perspective just makes everybody relax and not do what they should have been doing already and have implemented by October last year. So we're a bit behind. Finland is a bit ahead of us. Sweden and Norway a bit behind us as well. But as we all know, the Nordic countries tend to do some of the best implementation of new law from the EU. So I'm pretty sure it will be fine once it's implemented, but it's hard to know what to do when there's no law to follow. In Denmark, right after we got the law, we got the first 3 guidelines. And this is, from my perspective, really good news, even though for the last 3 years, much of my work life has been helping people operationalize Article 21, telling them, what does this mean? What does Article 21, Section 1, number 2, handle incidents actually mean? Because that's quite a broad thing. But we got the guidelines on the general scope. We got guidelines on the governance and management roles, and we got guidelines on Article 21. the 10 minimum cybersecurity measures. And I actually think these are good guidelines. They're in Danish, so I'm not sure you want to read them unless you read Danish, but they can be translated. They're especially the last one, the guideline on cybersecurity management, risk management measures, is quite explicit in there's quite a few things you have to do. There are lots and lots of things you should do and some things you can do. And that's because it's a minimum implementation. So what's the minimum we can say you need to implement to actually say you're compliant with the 10 minimum requirements of Article 21? But it's also great when you look at the should do. I think, for example, the whole part about logs. So it says you should monitor your network and information systems. You should have logs to document your monitoring of your NIS systems. And we're talking both inbound, outbound network traffic. We're discussing. We're talking about creation, modification, and deletion of users. Giving them new access rights, what systems and applications they have access to, how many privileged access accounts there are, what activities the accounts are doing, who can and what changes are made to critical configuration and backup files and stuff like that. So there's quite a lot to gain from reading this if you look at the 10 minimum requirements and say, I really don't know how to start this. So from my perspective, it's really good, but I'm going to go a bit more into all of them. The next one is actually, the first one should be on the scope. It's funny from my perspective because I felt like they changed the scope of which systems fell within NIS2 from the first law they sent into hearing last year and the one that came this year. But what I found out was they were actually just translating something that the EU Commission said. And that's that Article 21 requires essential important entities to take measures. And these measures refer to all operations and services of the entity concerned, and not specific information, technology assets, or critical services. So this has in the Danish law and guidelines been translated into every system that is used for all of your operations fall within the NIS2 scope. Whereas my initial thought was it's those that support and make us capable of supplying the services that that ensure that we fall within the 18 sectors of the NIS2. But this is actually, it comes from the Commission. It came out in 2023. It was actually the EU Commission's interpretation of Article 4 on the interaction of between NIS2 sector-specific regulation. But it's actually the Commission that gives this opinion. So from a legal perspective, the legal value can be assumed to be pretty high. In Denmark, they also did a slight change on the definition of small enterprises, where when you read the directive, it says 50 employees and 10 million turnover. It's now in Denmark 50 employees or 10 million turnover plus 10 million balance sheet. But that's not so important as this scope, because the scope has a huge impact on how we implement NIS2 in our entities, for me, within the clients. The first thing is, and I've discussed this quite extensively with our supervisory authorities, our competent authorities, and we really, yes, they feel like we need to do some sort of risk assessment on every system we have. It can either be a full risk assessment, it could be a screening, something. They don't specify the level. They don't have any requirements that every system has to follow the same level of risk assessment. It can be a tiered risk assessment where you have some that are small, some that are large, some that need the full Monty. But it's very important that we make sure that all systems have been at least screened or have a risk assessment. And then through the entire, all of this must be documented, because we won't be deemed compliant by the competent authority unless we can document that we've been through everything. And when I read the guidelines, Danish guidelines, it keeps saying after each of the 10 requirements, this is how you document it. They map it into ISO, they map it into a few other frameworks because those are the most broadly used in Denmark. But they keep saying you have to document it. You can document it by frameworks, or you can document it by just keeping processes that show that you've done all this. And then mitigation. Well, initially, they say that all risks need to be identified and treated. Treating a risk can also be accepting a risk. But given that we have to do some sort of screening or risk assessment, we really need to start focusing on what needs mitigating, what kind of mitigation do we need, what can we accept, what can we stop using. We keep referring back to the 4 risk treatment methods. So we're in a, sometimes I fear that NIS2 is ending up like GDPR did, a huge paper compliance exercise. But then again, given that these are risks that we can't just accept because they are risks toward our own company, but they can be risks towards society, then that makes it harder for the management to say, yeah, sure, we can accept that risk because it won't really be that bad for us. No, but it affects society at a different level than us. When I have to use an argument, I keep telling them about Colonial Pipeline, where the shutting down of the pipeline made sure that the owners of the pipeline didn't lose money from transporting oil that where they couldn't get money from selling the oil, but the risks and the consequences they inflicted on the states that didn't get oil in the US were much larger than the risks that the companies faced. So the societal risks have to be weighed against the risks for the company. The last part, vendors. We really see a lot of companies having trouble with their vendors because we now need to assess criticality of all our vendors, and that can be really hard unless you really understand how they tie into your entire value chain. Danish Crown in Denmark, they had a great example. They had mapped all their vendors, labeled them with their criticality, and then the company that sends them trucks to pick up waste material from their food production. Danish Crown, they mostly make bacon and other stuff, but they had a malware attack and all their data was encrypted, so they couldn't send out the trucks. This initially didn't affect Danish Crown, but once the food garbage kept piling up, Danish regulation states that they can't produce anymore once they had reached a certain amount of food waste. So they had to stop production on all their Danish facilities until this company could start sending out trucks to pick up the waste. And they actually had to start up using a spreadsheet and a phone chain and keep calling their drivers to say, where are you? How far are you from that plant? And for Danish Crown, this was a huge eye-opener because they hadn't thought about this vendor as being critical in any way, because they could produce meat without this vendor. Yes, up to a point, and then suddenly they couldn't produce meat anymore. So really, we need to maybe take a new look and a new perspective at how do we assess vendors. Then the next guidelines after scope is management bodies, and I keep juggling with, I know what these terms are in Denmark, but I had to make sure I got the right translation, because management bodies, according to the directive, can be up to CEO level. And that's hard to understand if you don't have a CEO or you have a board of directors, an executive board, who's responsible, who sets out the strategic direction, who's running the company on a daily basis. So at least in a Danish context, it said if you have a board of directors, then they are the management bodies of Article 20. If you don't have a board of directors, it's your executive board. If you also don't have an executive board, then it's the part of the company that's most akin to an executive board. In the public sector, it's easier per se. It's the top administrative management in the authority. So in a municipality, it's the executive board. It's in our authorities, it's the executive board, and it's not the political level. That would also be kind of hard, getting just elected and then be responsible for something that somebody else spent years neglecting. So at least from a Danish perspective, it's good that we have this. I think I'm assuming from my GDPR perspective that the authorities in Norway and Sweden tend to look at each other, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. I know that from a GDPR perspective, the competent authorities there keep looking at each other and saying, what do you do? How do you see this? How do you interpret this? So the Danish guidelines could be some sort of inspirational source for the competent authorities in at least those countries. So what does this mean with regards to the requirements from Article 20 to the managerial board, managerial bodies? Well, what the Danish guidelines say about what they have to do, I'm sure you remember Article 20, where it says you have to be able to identify risk and prioritize risk and make sure that risk mitigating measures are implemented and you can be held responsible for it. The Danish wording is rather vague, as you can see here. Relevant courses, they can be general courses on cyber information security. It could be workshops, it can be internal, they can be based on European or international standards. They don't specify the content, but they do say that if you want to know what the content should have, look into that directive where you can, in Article 20 and the preambles for Article 20, see what they mean with what you need to be able, the knowledge you need to obtain from the courses. That being said, they do give some examples on how you can fulfill these requirements. 2 examples to be exact, and we have them here. I'm not entirely sure I agree, but they say that if you have a board of directors in a private company, and 2 of the members have knowledge of strategic management of cybersecurity and cyber and information security, and 1 of the members has completed a training course or maybe a certification, then that would be an acceptable level of education for that board of directors in that private company. The other, where a public authority has a half-day seminar once a year for the members of the authority's Cyber Information Security Committee, then the authority itself has organized the seminar. This is still okay as long as it's people that know what they talk about that come out and have this seminar. So for me, this is actually less than I expected would be the requirements to fulfill Article 20, but this is what we have in a Danish context. The last guideline. No, actually, it maps into this. So that was a bit about the 3 guidelines we have in Denmark. I think my email is on the last slide, so if you want them, feel free to email me and I can send you the guidelines or the links if you would prefer them to have the links at the authorities. As I already mentioned, it's a ministry that was established in August, and they actually haven't moved everything around, so it's in the right URLs. Some are in URLs for organizations that no longer exist. So, but looking beyond that, I can send you the guidelines and you can Google Translate them if you want. Next up with the challenges we see. I have some colleagues and I discussed this with them. And it's, well, it's something I had to talk about, because what we really see is that the world is becoming more and more insecure. We have more conflicts, there's political insecurity, We know that close allies across the Atlantic may no longer be as close as they used to be. And that actually means that we probably have to strengthen our cyber information security to be able to handle this new situation. And that's that type of new world order that we're probably heading towards. Well, we get new challenges. The first, from my perspective, is the hybrid threat. We see a rise in hybrid threats. I don't work much outside the Nordics, so I can't say much outside of this, but we have seen or heard or read about this. There's the pipelines in the North Sea. Well, for us it's called the Østersøen. The unidentified drones that fly around Swedish power plants, nuclear power plants, the drones that fly around military installations. We see North Koreans trying to pose as people you can hire for remote work. The hybrid threat, where we see cyber being combined with things in the real world, is really on the rise, and it requires us to think about risk in a different way, because we can't just say it's handled by our access policy, because if we have a person who's not who they say they are and we think they are somebody else, they will and they get employed, they get access to our systems. So this NIS2 all hazards approach to risk assessment and the physical aspect from the Critical Incident Resilience Act, they help us, but almost all of my clients are not up to the task of combining the physical realm with the digital realm and seeing how they can handle threats that cross these two realms, and especially the lack of experience of saying an attack was somebody driving in and setting fire to a power plant transformer, or putting blue paint color into a water supply system and doing a DDoS attack while the actual goal is something fourth. This new way of thinking about threats is challenging to almost all of our clients, and I think that I'm assuming that it's not just our clients, but many other clients that see this. And I think it's something that we really have to see, how can we use the CER to combine with the NIS2 and the all hazards approach to make sure we understand what are the risks outside of the digital sphere. I also see a clear rise in destruction, and I'm sure that this comes from the conflict in Ukraine, because the state-sponsored groups, they don't necessarily need to do quick in, quick out, get some cash. They are more into, especially in the utility sector, scouting and probing, see how much reach they can get within your network. How can they aim at disrupt or destroy? And this is also something that we probably aren't used to. We saw it back in the days when we first had WannaCry, and then we had NotPetya, which was a wiper with the destruction aim. But we get it now as well, where it's more state-sponsored groups that have this destruction aim, or at least scout with the aim to destroy or disrupt if it comes to that. So really, the disaster recovery of this cybersecurity framework is a great way to look at this. See, how do we recover from a real destruction? It's easier to recover if it's just systems and data and you can have backup of that. But if they actually also go in and destroy physical equipment, then it becomes much harder. We see many medium-sized companies now actually looking into what kind of redundancies can we get? How can we get redundancies within our systems, or actually hot site, cold sites? So this is an interesting challenge, and we are. I'm enjoying working with it because it gives me something new to think about and new ways to imagine threats and how to counter them. I already spoke about it. Utility sector and public sector are some of the main focuses of these more of the threat actors that rise from the from Russia and maybe Iran and North Korea, not so much probably, but especially from Russia. I have quite a few clients within the utility sectors, and especially water and electricity. They have seen a huge intake in the attacks and the sophistication of the attacks. Some of them said they have experienced 20 to 30 times as many attacks over the last 3 years as they saw before. I read about it yesterday or the day before that the SVT in Sweden has been under attack. It seems like mostly a DDoS, maybe a defamation, but it's to disrupt service. And disrupting service of utility sectors and public authorities is something that causes distrust and fear within the population, because these are things that you rely on being effective and available all the time. So these state-sponsored actors, it seems like they are broadening their scope for what they can and when and will attack. Then there's the skill gap, and for me, this is probably one of the biggest things. It's been around for years, and it keeps growing. We see so many clients that need help implementing NIS2, AI Act, CRA, DORA, all of these new regulations from the EU, and they don't have the resources, but more urgently, they don't have the skills. We need so many more people with experience and the skills, and this is where I really see that the ISO standards, getting certified in them, documenting experience within them is something that can really help you. We see a lot of demand for 27001 and 2, but also 27005, 31, and 35, because all of these have different aspects. So it's both the ISMS framework requirements, the what you should do, the controls and implementing guidelines and how to do it, the risk management, risk assessment framework, and then the disaster recovery business continuity part of 31, and the information security incident management of 35. So all of these are things that really speak into all the new regulations that we get from the EU. Another thing that NIS2 really nails is the challenges in the OT security. OT, or operations technology, is significantly different from IT security. We talk about safety, we talk about it's systems that you can't just patch, it's systems that were made to last basically forever, or at least 10 to 20 years. It's systems that are often a black box for their companies, and they don't know how to, they often they say it's on our operations production network, we don't touch it, but they control it from their IT network, because the once upon a time they were air gapped, now they've come together and they're joined, and you can jump over to the OT network, and programmable logic controllers are some of the hackers' favorite things to compromise and get access to the network. So we really need people with better OT security skills. And in Denmark, there's such a lack of this skill that some big companies have started their own OT security education, simply to make up of the lack of available hands and people. And they're not training IT professionals. They're training people with machine educations, electricians, and stuff like that. Blacksmiths, but that's because they use them in the utility sector. And don't think 15th century blacksmiths with an anvil and a hammer, but blacksmiths of today. So really, this is an area where we need more, and lots of people need to figure out how to get the few, lots of companies need to figure out how to get the few people that know something within this area. The next big things, well, I'm pretty sure that every one of you knows something about cloud sovereignty, or at least have read about cloud sovereignty, because I can't open my newsfeed today without reading about it and having clients tell me that they need to know more about it. And well, why not? I mean, the ICC case, it has scared the living daylights out of decision makers, top level management, board members, politicians, governments. What are the chances? Well, the chances of Microsoft shutting down services in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, Finland, they are extremely unlikely. But since they did in the ICC case, even though that Microsoft say they did it based on the ICC's own request, which is probably correct given that Khan was under investigation. But if ICC hadn't asked for it, Microsoft would still have been forced to do this because they are an American company. They have to abide by American law, and when the American Foreign Ministry sanctions a person, then American companies have to follow those sanctions. So, especially in Denmark, the government says, so if we won't sell Greenland to Trump, will he sanction Denmark? And will Microsoft then have to stop providing services to us? So this is a huge focus in Denmark. Everybody is scared that they might be the next ones that lose. It's one thing to sanction a person. It's an entirely different thing to sanction a country, especially a close ally like the Nordic countries would be. But the entire case with the ICC has, because of this scare to the decision makers, has started a really big discussion in Denmark and in other places where we talk about how reliant are we on American companies. We're talking about vendor lock-in. I think every state level authority in Denmark and ministry uses Microsoft services. It's MS365. Everybody uses it. And this makes us vulnerable. So cloud sovereignty, everybody is talking about it. We have municipalities that are moving away from Microsoft. Schleswig-Holstein in Germany moved away from Microsoft. And it seems like it's probably easier to move away from the infrastructure and the platform and less so from the services. The Danish Ministry of Digitization said that, oh, we're now moving away from Microsoft. And when you read the article, what they are going to do is half of the employees are going to get Linux and LibreOffice. They're still going to use Teams. They're still going to use Exchange. They're still going to use Outlook. And they're still going to use Azure for shared services. So they're not really moving out of Microsoft, but at least they're giving it a shot. But for me, I think the problem is that the services are so hard to replace. And if we want to build something like that in Europe, it's going to take a long time. And I don't think 5 years is enough. I think we'll be looking at a decade long of work to establish something that might end up being just as good, or it could be worse, could be better, could be more expensive, could be less expensive. So it's really a huge bet. But I understand the political reasons, and I understand why so many companies look into this, because they cannot risk the mere thought of Microsoft being able to shut off all their services, because most companies would be paralyzed if they could no longer use Outlook and Teams. The Word and Excel and PowerPoint less so. They're okay alternatives, but the other services, they are so hard to replace. But besides cloud sovereignty, we have regulation. This webinar started talking about NIS2, and I also mentioned AI Act. I mentioned DORA. I mentioned we have the GDPR. We're still working on implementing all these things. We get AI Act now in a bit. There's a Cyber Resilience Act, and so many more. This is screenshots from EU, where the legislative train schedule is where you can see what they have in store for us. And there you can see that they've already adapted 49 types of regulation within the digital sphere. They have 16 more coming up, but they have also announced 28 more, and they have first drafts on 12. So quite a few more regulations are coming. So we really need to be able to handle more and more and more regulation. I had a talk with a client today, and they did risk assessment on systems and risk assessment on processing personal data. And they did it as two different, and they hardly asked the same questions, but the people out in the business, in the company, felt like they were asking the same things, even though it was slightly different. And if we have to have a different way of assessing risks and documenting compliance across each of these new regulations, your compliance department will explode in manpower and resource requirements. So really, when I talk about all the new regulations we get, and these are some of the regulations we get, we really need to think about having a unified framework where you can just plug in new regulations, map them up to your framework, talk about the gaps, put the new gaps into the framework based on the new requirements. But this is from the last 5 to 6 years. We have gotten a few strategies. We have gotten quite a few directives and regulations within the cybersecurity sphere, within data and with technology and responsibility. If they are red, then that means they are still being negotiated. And if there's I don't actually know what that name, the stick with a dot under it, I don't know the English name for that, exclamation point, then they are, there's been agreement on the wording, political unity on what we need to do, but not on the wording yet. But this is just from the last 6 years. And the slide before, we saw that 16 were close to adoption, 12 have been tabled, and 28 more have been announced. So that makes 56 potential new regulations that we are facing in our compliance department. And on top of that, we get all the data spheres. We get data spheres for sharing data across EU. So we're talking about free flow of data within the sectors and within the countries. It's health, manufacturing, agriculture, finance, mobility, green, energy, public, skills, and open science. And we need tools for having the data, sharing the data, being compliant with it. There's governance on all of this. There's so much regulation within the data spheres, on top of all the usual regulation regarding cybersecurity, personal data, tech, and other responsibilities. And we need to make sure that all of this, if our companies fall within all these, then how do we keep ourselves compliant without having to spend huge amount of money on security and compliance? Because most companies really want to spend the money effectively, risk-based approach, and they don't want to spend more money than they have to. And I'm pretty sure you all agree on that and know that. That was 45 minutes for me. And as agreed upon with the PECB, that means we are now open for questions if anyone have any questions. And I can see the first question, and that is, how are smaller entities expected to comply with NIS2 given the scale of requirements? Is there a risk of overburdening them? Yes, very much so. I think small companies that just fall within the scope, meaning they have 50 employees or they have a turnover of 10 million euros or more, they will have a really hard time documenting all of this in a compliance perspective, because they need to at least risk assess all their systems and see what are the requirements towards the society. And for them, it's mostly basically a focus on how do we actually earn money while supplying our primary service. There's also the exception to the exception, where entities that are actually smaller than the minimum requirements fall within this too, even though they're smaller, because they have a certain role, like they're important on a smaller geographical scale. I keep saying if we have 3 water suppliers in a smaller island, and all of them are so small they fall outside of NIS2, then we don't have water security on that island. So the government has to actually say one or all of you fall within NIS2 anyways. So when I talk to smaller companies, I keep saying you probably need to band together with similar entities, so you can pool your IT and compliance resources into a shared service center where they can help you with compliance out, because you don't have the resources yourself and you need to be able to document some of this compliance. I think there was a second question. You noted the all hazards approach in NIS2 and CER CER emphasizes on physical threats. Do you think companies are truly equipped to integrate both physical and cybersecurity risk management today? Very few are. I think my experience is that less than 1 in 10 of my clients are actually there where they think physical security when they think cybersecurity, simply because they haven't. When you talk about cybersecurity, and all of you have an issue, have trouble getting money for getting funding for security, we sometimes talk about a window of opportunity. You were hacked, or a competitor or a large company had an incident. Now it's top of mind for everybody. You have a window of opportunity to maybe get some funding for the risks that have been ignored for years. And so many companies have never had a moment where their top level management was scared because of a hybrid threat or a threat in the physical world, that this window of opportunity opened up so they can actually integrate physical and cybersecurity risk management. So we really need to help them understand how the physical world acts upon the digital world, because management and sometimes security professionals really don't know this at the moment, and they're struggling, and I'm struggling just explaining it to them because it's so different and we have so few examples. So the answer is no, and it's going to be really hard. Question 3, how do organizations currently balance between digital and physical threat preparedness, especially when budgets are tight? What I see mostly is it's 2 different budgets, because one is physical security usually lies with facility management, and they don't prioritize security. They prioritize that the doors are locked when you're not open, and you can only access with a card or a code. And digital talks a lot about threats and threat actors and vulnerabilities, and facility management doesn't really get the attention because they don't understand how themselves to emphasize the need for better physical security. So I think digital is going to run with the budget, even though the budget isn't really big. So it's going to be an issue. And the 4th question is, since the war in Ukraine, we've seen spikes in attack sophistications. Are the Danish businesses adapting fast enough, or are we playing catch up? The big companies are actually adapting really fast. The smaller countries, the municipalities, smaller utility companies, they're putting out fires. They see the majority of attacks getting caught in the firewall, and that's how they know how many attacks there are. But they are not prepared, and they're working around the clock to just put out fires because they aren't ready for this, and they are playing catch up all the time. 5th question, given the physical safety implications of OT security, how can organizations ensure alignment between their IT and OT teams to prevent gaps? That's a really good question, especially since my knowledge of OT is that we need to do it, and I don't know anything about OT. So I really don't know how to help. I have a few colleagues that are OT experts. I usually say, fix this. I don't know how to do it. I'm not technically enough skilled to know that. If you email me the question, I will be happy to talk with my colleagues and see if we can figure out a question, an answer, and send it back to you. The sixth and so far last question seems to be cloud sovereignty was mentioned as the next big thing. What's my view on how this could reshape data governance in the EU and the Nordic region? Well, what I see is that the companies that are really scared about cloud sovereignty, they start by going to EU clouds, and then not considering that some of the EU clouds are owned by American companies, different thing. But I think the Commission has the right of it when they say, in the long term, we need a operating system like Windows or Linux that is totally open source and that can match Windows, and that's achievable. But getting services that match Teams, OneDrive, Google Drive, Google Workspace, Outlook, all that is going to be really hard. I see that Nextcloud, I think it was, they have some pretty good apps. I personally like Thunderbird from Mozilla. But I really think that it's gonna be so costly and take such a long time, that I'm not sure it's ever going to be done before we're past that. But I do think that we will see many more smaller cloud hosting companies within the Nordic regions. They might then in their backbone use some American cloud and some French or German cloud, but at least mirror it. So American cloud is mostly a backup, and if it's gone, then it's just redundancy that's gone. So I think that we will see that. I also think that if ever Microsoft were to stop delivering their services to us, the EU would nationalize all American data centers across the member states, and then we would have free data centers from Microsoft. But I think that we will see many more that call themselves cloud companies. They might not actually be cloud, but it will be mostly infrastructure. In some platform, it will be storage, it will be backup, it will not be services. That's too far ahead. And I think that was it for me today. Thank you all for listening. I hope you got some things that you could use, and I hope you all get a very nice Friday. I myself will be heading to my son's school for the summer party. Thank you for today. Bye-bye.